6Connex, our products are uniquely positioned to make a positive environmental impact. We have a fully remote organization distributed across the globe, committed to doing our part in achieving a greener future and enabling other organizations, customers, and partners to do the same. We're deeply committed to sustainability, but we don't just talk the talk, we also walk the walk. Together, we will help maintain the beauty of this planet while enabling our coworkers, clients, partners, and family members to join us in our mission of leaving the world better than we found it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Luis Martins. I'm the CMO here at 6Connex. Let me be the first one to thank you for joining us. We're talking about our journey in shaping a greener future. I am joined here today by Ron and Ojas from WSP, our partners in this journey. I'll let them introduce themselves, starting with you, Ron, if you could.
Thank you, Luis, and thank you everyone for being here today. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Ron Feingold. I am a sustainability consultant with over 15 years of experience. I am a project director at WSP, USA's Sustainability, Energy, and Climate Change team. And we're part of the climate resilience and sustainability business. And we partner with our clients to provide comprehensive services in support of their sustainability journey. Through all parts of the journey, from beginning of those just starting all the way to more mature programs. Overall, we support over 120 customers and over 150 projects annually. And we are so excited to be here today to talk to you about what we've learned and our overall strategy in realizing the carbon footprint of a virtual and in-person event. So thank you again. And with that, I'll pass it off to Ojas.
Hi, Ron. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. This is an exciting moment. My name is Ojas. I'm a consultant at WSP USA and under the same team Ron is, which is the Sustainability, Energy, Climate Change Division. My role on this project was to help map out greenhouse gas inventories and support building up the methodology and data for 6Connex as we analyze virtual versus in-person events. And I'm really excited to show you what we have today.
Thank you both. I'm going to walk you through some slides here, and it's a little bit of a personal journey for me. And I get to start talking about my hometown. I was born in this city in Brazil called Manaus. And I was trying to find a way to share with you where Manaus is. And I found this on the internet. It's just a map at night of the world. You can see South America, a little bit of Central America on the top left here, and then South America in the bottom. Manaus is this dot right here that you see surrounded by this dark area that looks like the ocean, but this is actually the Amazon forest. It's unique in a way that you cannot drive there. There are no major cities around. And if I show you a little bit more about the city, it was built in it started out in the 1700s to show that we could, as Brazilians, conquer this area. When I was living there, I left many years ago. I left when I was 18, so quite a few years ago, and there were about 600,000 people living in the town at that time. Right now, there are almost 2 million, so it's grown. It's a big city now. I tried to get some pictures to give you a feel of the city, and I couldn't find any pictures that didn't show the opera house that was built in the 1800s or so, or the river. You see on the backdrop of this image here, the Rio Negro River. And there are many, many pictures of Manaus that show this river. And what's interesting about it, and until I was 18 years old, I didn't realize that. But in Manaus, when you drive somewhere, you get to the river. Or if you drive the other direction, you get to the forest. And it's sort of an island this way. And what's really interesting about this is that When you think about that river that shows off in every picture, that's the dark river on the right here. And you see a little bit of Manaus on the right of this picture. And it merges with this other river called Solimões. And as you can see, they don't merge immediately. They don't mix. They have different densities so that the water don't mix immediately. But it's actually this junction of these two rivers that form the Amazon River. That you guys, I'm sure, are familiar with. So having lived somewhere else after I turned 18, I have flown many times from Sao Paulo, where I live and where I am today, to Manaus over the last 20 years or so. And when you look down the plain, all you see is like this ocean of green, like you can see on this picture, and a bunch of rivers that cross the Amazon forest. And I had this kind of awakening way back when in 2000. I flew to visit my family. Personally, very tough time for me. It was the last time I saw my dad. And when I was flying back, I was looking down at this ocean of green, and I started seeing something that wasn't there before. I started seeing all the forest burning. And on this flight alone, I saw like 3 instances of that. And this was very, very unusual to me. I had never seen it before. And as time went by and I kept on doing the same route and looking down the plain, these clearings and these burnings just got more intense and more often. And it struck me that, you know, when you're born in the middle of the forest, like I was showing to you guys a minute ago, and you look at the rivers and you look at this forest, you think it's so huge, nothing will ever impact it. But as I can tell you and attest to it, it's been impacted. And you don't have to look only at the Amazon forest. This is a picture taken 3 weeks ago in Germany. Flooding, the West Europe there just struggled a lot with a lot of rain in a very short period of time. And you had the infrastructure collapse in a lot of places. This is Germany. This is Switzerland that you see right there. You can see this is a beautiful city, Liège in Belgium. And this is 3 weeks ago, right? With flooding, something they had never experienced before. The other impact is the extreme weather. You can see there someone taking a thermometer, and it's 129.6 degrees. And this is in California. So it doesn't matter where we are, where we're born, but when we look around, there's obviously something happening and something that we need to act. So throughout my career, I've done quite a lot of different sustainability initiatives. I've done the Good and Oak recycling, which really works well. I worked with manufacturing companies, so programs that did recycling made sense. I've done carbon offset programs, and I've done reforestation or bioforest, if you will. And all these programs are great. But in my experience, what happened over time is that depending on the mood of the company, on the marketing budget, on the sales, this programs tend to take a back seat. So I was really thrilled when I joined 6Connex, and the core business that we have at 6Connex is building this virtual venues that you are now experimenting. By the way, you are at a virtual venue called The Way to Do Virtual. You are at the greenhouse, and you will see at the end of this environment an invitation for you to get to see a few more of our assets. By the way, if we bore you through this presentation, please take a look at the rest of the environment. We built this. It's meant to be a self-guided tour. We have a lot of ideas, a lot of cool stuff to share with you in this environment. And you will see what I saw when I came to 6Connex, that it's kind of obvious that we are impacting CO2 emissions positively by doing things virtually. But when I joined in January, and I did my first research and competitions and partners, there was not one single partner, one single competitor that knew what that meant, had hard numbers to say, well, by doing virtual or hybrid events, you're actually impacting positively this way. We didn't know that. So what we decided to do here at 6Connex about 4 or 5 months ago was to find that out. And we partnered with WSP to help us really come up with a methodology and what the impact that we have in the business. So with that said, I'm going to ask Ron to walk us through the methodology and the findings of this study. Ron?
Yes, thank you, Louise, again, and thank you for sharing that story. And so now we're going to walk through kind of the process and methodology that we took in order to be able to come up with those values. But before we do that, I just wanted to go through some of the basics. And so we talked about greenhouse gases and climate change. And what ultimately we did was we tried to calculate the carbon footprint or greenhouse gas inventory of what would take to host an on-site or on-person event versus a virtual event like we're on today. So a carbon footprint is really the total amount of greenhouse gases that are generated by our actions. And this could be something as simple as driving a car, turning on our TV, computer. Many of the things that we do release what we call greenhouse gases. And greenhouse gases are gases in the Earth's atmosphere that trap heat. And so they let the sunlight pass through the atmosphere, but they prevent the heat that the sunlight brings from leaving the atmosphere, which is ultimately, what we are saying is causing climate change. And so again, the objective, as Louise pointed out, was really to say, okay, we have this event, what are the greenhouse gases associated if we were to do it in person, versus virtual. And so what we did to ensure this was the first thing we wanted to do was set the event boundaries. What would have occurred had we attended this event on site versus what would have occurred if we were doing it virtually. After that, we collected the necessary information, reviewed it, and then conducted our greenhouse gas calculations to understand the impacts of these different events. And then we summarized it and put our results and methodology into documentation so that we could further analyze and understand some of the equivalencies associated with that. So in addition to collecting the data, we also had to make some assumptions that we will address kind of throughout the next couple of slides. And so we wouldn't be able to obtain all of the activity data or primary information. And when it was relevant, we made certain estimations and assumptions by using our own experience, knowledge, as well as reputable sources, and then validated by 6Connex. So as mentioned, the first part was setting the event boundaries. So really, what are the material components that occur during a live event versus a virtual event? And ultimately, we determined that those most info categories for physical was things like travel, so travel to and from the event. Once, if you were flying, the travel from the airport to the site, lodging, overnight stays, hotel accommodations, what type of hotel, meals, the types of food, the amount of money spent on food, the actual event space, so the electricity and heat used for that event space, and then marketing material, things that might be handed out. And for the virtual, what we tried to do is compare as best as we could possible things that would occur. So certainly, your virtual workstation, the things that we're on now, if you're using a secondary monitor, the impacts of using the camera, on your computer, the actual servers associated with 6Connex. So everything that we are now, there's a host of servers that are allowing us to run this platform. And then marketing materials. Maybe you won't get all of the different booths, but certainly there are some events that may have sent a shirt to the first X amount of people to sign up, and we still have waste while we're at home and still eating meals. And so once the boundaries were set, we needed to start to collect the information. And so we needed to understand different elements of the event. How many people were attending? How many days was the event? What types of hotel? How much marketing material? What may have been the budget, right, to spend on certain meals? And where are these attendees traveling from, right? So to fully understand the equivalency, we had to understand what possibly would have taken place had the event occurred. And so using things like IP addresses, we were able to identify what those locations were and then estimate the distance traveled to that site to be able to come up with the greenhouse gas emissions associated with travel and things like that. And again, so when data was not available, we had to make some key assumptions and estimations that were then validated. So, we might all go to different events. Maybe there's a budget for $100 per day, maybe $50 per day. And so we had to use some thoughts and coming up, with a number that could be applicable to all of these different attendees. So after we collected the data, reviewed it, ensured that all data was accurate and correct, we then started to build out our data calculations and carbon impacts. And we did this for 7 different types of events from all over the globe, looking at small events to big events to really try to understand, what some of those key impacts were, which we'll discuss some of our findings and results later on in this discussion. And so to calculate the greenhouse gas emissions, once we had the activity data, we built a data calculation workbook, which essentially was able to take the information from each event and then multiply it by what we call an emission factor. And essentially an emission factor is a representative value that attempts to relate the quantity of a greenhouse gas released to the atmosphere with an activity. So for instance, if I'm running my energy for X amount of hours, there's an associated emission factor with that. And sometimes it's at the country level and sometimes it's more locally based. So in the US, we have eGrid, which breaks it down by region, and it's a mix of all of the different energy types associated with that activity. And so for each of our boundary, each of the areas that we were looking for both the in-person and virtual event, we took that information and then we multiplied it by the corresponding emission factor from EPA and the UK DEFRA up-to-date sources to be able to kind of compile what that information was and the greenhouse gas impact from both an in-person and virtual event. And then with that information, we were able to put together our final documentation, which showed the results and the summary, the methodology, as well as the equivalency in order to make it in real life, it's one thing to understand that you might have avoided 1,000 metric tons of CO2, but what does that mean? How many trees could that be equivalent to, or roads, cars removed from the road? And so overall, this was a very great exercise. I think we learned a lot about the live and in-person events. And so with that, I'd like to pass this off to Ojas, where he can dig into some of those findings and results that we have discussed.
Thanks, Ron, and I appreciate it. And I can imagine everyone is now sitting at home and saying, wow, these numbers, what does any of this even mean? So I'll try to help guide us through this. So essentially, we're looking at 7 distinct events, and we're looking at the amount of emissions that would have occurred virtually on the green circle. And then on the lighter side, we'd see the amount of emissions that would have happened if the same event were to have happened in person. And then the one to the right in dark green would be the one that the amount of emissions avoided. And so something that was, across all 7 events, we analyzed different things, different number of attendees, different amount of people traveling in and out, different places. And what were the 3 big high-level trends that we noticed? And, surprisingly enough, as we all expected, transportation was a huge amount. Events that occur in big conferences where a lot of people are traveling to, distances where, flights are over 12 to 14 hours. It just has so many emissions with it because people are coming from all over the place. But secondly, and something that was interesting was when you go, a little bit more down away from transportation, you can see based on the number of attendees, just how much the emissions increase based on food. I can imagine right now, someone's maybe having a snack, just eating something. Now imagine this exact webinar was taken in place and we were all congregated in one place. As Ron mentioned, the cost of catering to those large groups of people goes up. And because of that, the emissions also go up because of that. And so events where, you have a couple of 100 to a couple of 1,000, we saw a huge increase in the emissions just from meals and where the event was being hosted. And that's because everyone's congregating in the same place and the cost to provide that level of food or meals would go up. The second thing we notice is number of days, right? So you take a flight over, you get off, you go to the airport, you drive to the hotel. Those emissions are high. We already know that. But then you're there for not just 1 day or 2 days. You're there for 3 or 4. Those big conferences, they take place across a large number of days because companies have a lot of things to talk about. And the longer the number of days, you would see a huge increase in the emissions from lodging and hotel stay. It's not something that we would have expected, but it makes a lot of sense now looking back on it, because when you have, yes, 3,000 people, but they're only there for a day or 2, the emissions are relatively, coherently the same as when if you would expect them to come in and travel these large distances. But the moment the days go longer, the emissions from hotels go up much, much more. And so what this really shows is when you're hosting an event virtually, you're able to really cut down on those emissions of staying in a hotel, those emissions of food, because you're not catering for 100 people unless you have a very large family, which in that case, I'm assuming that's every day. But, usually you would be avoiding so much carbon emissions from having an event virtually just by those 2, and of course the transportation aspect. And when we look at the next slide and we try to combine these big numbers, what can we see? So those 7 events that we looked at, those 7 samples that we analyzed and tried to see what would happen, we saw that the equivalency of hosting those events is equivalent to 66 million miles being driven by an average passenger vehicle. That is a huge amount of distances covered. We all drive around in a car once in a while, and you can imagine about 5,700 cars emitting carbon. The equivalent of that is hosting those 7 events. And then if you go into a grander scale and look at it across 6Connex overall, contribution hosting these many events, you can see about 9.2 million acres of forest that would have been able to sequester the carbon if those events, compared to if those events happened in person. So we saw Luis talking about how he was flying over those forests and he noticed those changes and how it was getting depleted and depleted. Now we can imagine all the events that 6Connex has hosted, if they were all taking place in person, that's about 9.2 million of those types of trees being able to capture that carbon. But because those events were taken, virtually, they were able to avoid, about 7.5 million metric tons. So it's a huge number, and it shows just how significant hosting an event virtually is compared to hosting an event in person. And it really speaks a lot to 6Connex mission about how their virtual, conferences is actually a good and important point, an impactful point for the environment. And with that, I'll let Luis close it off with 6Connex program.
Louise, I think you might be on mute.
Thank you for saying that. Apologize. Misspoke for 3 minutes here. But, just listening to you guys talk about this just makes it seem so simple, so easy. And we all know that it took us a good 5 months to crunch numbers, come up with the right assumptions, test them out. So thank you guys for joining us in this journey. I think the results and the awareness that it generates really, really paid off. Appreciate the help and support to this. But we all know that sustainability is not a program that you do it once and done, right? It's not like that. It's a journey, and we're just starting ours. And the first thing I would say, oh, by the way, let me just tell you, if you have any questions, you can ask directly on the chat. So we do have a few questions that we've gotten already. If you have more, please make sure that you capture them here. But our journey as a company is really starting out, right? We have the benefit of having this great technology that we leverage to be our virtual headquarters. So 6Connex does not have a physical headquarters. Our headquarters is virtual, and we do everything from keeping the culture and sharing documentation, HR, marketing, sales. Everything is in one single place. We're always very careful about when we do participate in events, be it physical, be it hybrid. We're very careful about the impact that our materials have on the environment. So 6Connex is a green company. And we'll continue to promote and raise awareness throughout our existence here. We're also expanding on the program by doing 2 things. One is coming up with a avoidance calculator for CO2 emissions. So that will allow you to key in your event data, and we will let you know the range in which you'll be helping and supporting sustainability efforts with an estimation of CO2 avoidance there. The third thing we're going to do is we want to invest more, and we want to invite our partners, our customers, our friends to invest with us. So we'll create an additional program that most likely is going to be around either carbon offset or the reforestation efforts. So we'll be working with a reputable agency to help us out and expand that program forward. So with that, I'd love to address some of your questions. And I think there is, I can see a couple that came through. And there is one here that I think I'll pass it on to you, Ron, or to you, Ojas. It asks, how did we select the companies that we chose to report on?
Sure. And so as mentioned, what we were really looking for was a wide range of different types of events and organizations that we could look at. So, some diversification as far as geography, where it was located, if it was a remote or more city, amount of attendees, looking for a range from, small or maybe, a couple thousand to more, as well as, the amount of days for the event. So basically, just so we didn't use one type of event to be able to come up with the estimations, but to have a better sense of, what some of these impacts could be. So those are the types of things that we were hoping and looking for. And then we worked with 6Connex to identify those events that met those specifications. Great question.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. We had another question. It's will 6Connex provide clients with avoidable emissions feature prior to the event as part of the proposal? It's an excellent metric to provide in decision making. Thank you for asking this question, and I'll address it. So part of our effort of building that calculator is to do exactly that. We think that this should definitely be considered for decision making and in identifying how you structure your event and meaning if you're going to do something physically or hybrid, or you just want to do something virtually, we want to provide you with the key information that will allow you to do a better educated decision when considering the environment. So this is part of our effort of building the event calculator that should be out in the next 2 or 3 months. I have another question here that I think it's for you, Ron, if you don't mind, or for you, Ojas. Why were server emissions not as high?
Yeah, it's a great question, Luis. And I think one of the big things that when we think of server emissions, we think of data centers, big data centers consuming a huge amount of energy. When 6Connex hosts an event, they're not using the entire data center. They're only using a particular number of stacks within the server. And so that's one thing to keep in mind. And so when we also think of the event boundary, we assume that the event is not going to be taking place, 24/7. People will come in, they'll enjoy the event, kind of like this webinar right now, and then there will be a time when it's over. So we looked at the time of the events too. And so with the time and the number of stacks that they were using in the servers, we found the emissions and saw that the server emissions were not as significant as we expected. And I think that's why. It's a good question.
I'd just like to add one point to that. 6Connex also leverages the Amazon servers, and Amazon has made a commitment to purchase a lot of renewable energies to work off of those. So we anticipate that those impacts associated with servers could even decrease further in the future as Amazon continues to go towards those commitments.
Yep.
And I think we have a question that's sort of, it's adjacent to this answer. Where did most emissions from virtual events stem from?
They stem from meals and snacks. As I was saying in the findings, when we eat, we still have a lot of emissions that follow through after we dispose of the food and all the materials. But obviously, in comparison to an in-person event, it's much higher because the cost of catering to those people is more. So the emissions came from meals and snacks.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I think we have one more, and we'll close. We'll obviously offer you a way for you guys to ask more questions and get access to the report. But I think that's a very interesting question here. Will prospects be able to use the calculator prior to booking with 6Connex, or only after they are a customer? So obviously, this is a 6Connex investment, but I think the mission for sustainability is much, much bigger than any one single company. At the end of the day, whatever company you decide to use to run your virtual events, we know there are sustainability benefits for doing so. So our thought is to make this as public. So you will be able to come in, even if you use another platform, you'll be able to come into our environment, to our website, use your calculation, make an argument for doing a hybrid event, and hopefully you work with 6Connex. But if you have a competitor in mind that for whatever reason you feel fits better into your goals and objectives, by all means, I think the important message here is this has a significant impact in overall sustainability. So with that said, I want to give you a couple more assets, right? The first one is if you come to our sustainability page at 6Connex, you will see a link as soon as we close down this webcast that you can click on. It will take you to the sustainability page. There you have the report. This report available to you. You have a lot of information about the other things we're doing. You have the video that you saw in the beginning, so a lot of assets there. On this environment that you are in, this is the greenhouse environment as our way to do virtual. You also have some of this content available to you. And then, of course, I am available at luis.martins@6connex.com. You can direct any questions you may have for me. So again, Ojas, Ron, thank you so much for joining me on this webinar. For all of you attending, I really appreciate your time and your interest. This makes a difference. So thank you so much. Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.